The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just the ghost of you and me. It's just the smoke and gasoline. It's just the ghost of you and me. Of you and me.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Staring Into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me as always, my co-host, old boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty good. How is everybody tonight?
Tonight's episode is going to be fun. We got a really cool article for you tonight. This comes from Ancient Origins, and the headline is Witches, Vampires, and Werewolves. 10 ghoulish archaeological discoveries. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the article, we're going to talk a little bit about it as we go and afterwards, and it's really interesting stuff. Archaeologists are quite familiar with the unearthing of human remains, but occasionally they come across burials that are more bizarre and unsettling, from hybrid Frankenstein-type skeletons to vampires pinned to the ground with wooden stakes, witches held in their graves by heavy stones, and individuals with stones wedged in their mouths, iron sickles against their throats, or holes in their skulls that had been drilled to exorcise evil spirits. There are no shortage of strange and grisly discoveries. This Halloween we examined 10 such ghoulish discoveries. In 2014, archaeologists uncovered an ancient skeleton of a teenage girl in Albinga, Italy, which had been buried face down. The researchers said that the burying an individual in this way was indicative of the person having been rejected by society or considered a danger, possibly due to accusations of witchcraft. The discovery was made during an archaeological dig carried out by the Vatican's Pontifical Institute of Christian Archaeology at the complex of San Calocero, a burial ground on which a church was built around the 5th and 6th centuries AD. Located in Albinga along the Ligurian Riviera in northern Italy. The excavation director, Stefano Rossio, said that such burials were carried out as an act of punishment intended to humiliate the dead, and discoveries like this were considered rare. According to the research team, in extreme cases, victims were buried alive in the face-down position. However, this was not the case with the newly discovered burial. The prone burial was linked to the belief that the soul left the body through the mouth. Burying the dead face down was a way to prevent the impure soul from threatening the living. Anthropologist Elena Delu told Discovery News. Modern people have not been the only ones fascinated by the undead. Ancient Greeks on the island of Sicily had a fear of Revenant so dire, they weighed down bodies with rocks and amphora pieces to keep them from rising from the graves to haunt the living, says a researcher. On the other hand, and paradoxically, writes Carrie L. Solaski Weaver in Popular Archaeology, the Greeks also tried to contact the dead for divination through a practice called necromancy. Earlier this year, archaeologists working in a large cemetery near Camarina, an ancient coastal town in southeast Sicily, exhumed 2,905 bodies and excavated burial goods. In the necropolis, City of the Dead, called Passo Marinero, in use from the 5th through the 3rd centuries BC, researchers found grave goods including coins, figurines, and terracotta vases. They also found 2 bodies weighed down at the head, feet, and torso, with large stones and amphoria, apparently to keep them in their place. The land of the dead, or Hades. For ancient Greeks, the dead were subjects of both fear and supplication. Necrophobia, or the fear of the dead, is a concept that has been present in Greek culture since the Neolithic period. At the heart of this phobia is the belief that corpses are able to reanimate and exist in a state that is neither living nor dead, but rather undead. Weaver writes in her paper published in Popular Archaeology magazine. These liminal figures are deemed to be dangerous because it is understood that they leave their graves at night for the explicit purpose of harming the living. As a means of protection, the alleged undead were pinned in their graves or ritually killed. In 2013, archaeologists working on Bulgaria's Preparikon site found the skeleton of a male buried with an iron stake plunged through its chest, a ritual practiced in the Middle Ages to prevent the individual turning into the undead. Coins found with the body have been tentatively dated to the 13th and 14th century. It is not the first vampire grave to be uncovered in Bulgaria. The discovery echoes a similar one made in Sozopol. Throughout Bulgaria, the remains of over 100 vampire-treated people, all of them men and all of them prominent citizens, have been found. According to pagan beliefs, people who were considered bad during their lifetimes might turn into vampires after death, unless stabbed in the chest with an iron or wooden rod before being buried. People believed the rod would also pin them down in their graves to prevent them from leaving at midnight and terrorizing the living. Vampire legends form an important part of the region's folklore. In October of 2014, a Bulgarian-born farmer, Trach Dragonov, claimed to have found a box, chained shut, containing a werewolf-like skull, while plowing a new section of field in the village of Novo Selo, Republic of Macedonia. The account was reported to Ancient Origins by historian Filip Ganav, who spent time in Novo Selo while conducting research for his book on the Balkan Wars. Mr. Ganav met the farmer who showed him the box containing the unusual skull. He reported that the skull appears wolf-like, with the exception of an enlarged cranium, a trait found only in primate species. Mr. Ganav photographed the skull and shared them with government wildlife officials, who concluded that it was likely a wolf that suffered from Paget disease, a condition which causes the skull to increase in size and appear more human-like. Mr. Ganav said that werewolves have been a staple of Balkan folklore since before recorded history. The legends vary from region to region as far as how and why one becomes a werewolf. Some believe that a person is born with the ability to shapeshift into a wolf. Babies born with hair are said to have a proclivity for this. Other regions believe that a person who died in a mortal sin or made some other union with the devil would be reborn as werewolves. Archaeologists in Scotland believe they have located the final resting place of Lilith Addy, who was accused of being a witch, and following her death in prison was buried in deep mud with a heavy flat stone placed on top of her, a tradition based on the belief that witches could rise from their graves unless held down by a heavy stone. The Valleyfield Community Centre, based in Fife, Scotland, recounts the story of the Lilias. In the small village of Torryburn in the west of Fife in the year 1704, August 29th, an old woman, Lilias Addy, was accused of bringing ill health to one of her neighbors, a certain Jean Nelson. Summoned before the ministers and elders of Torryburn Church, poor old and confused Lilias confessed that she was indeed a witch. She told the grim-faced committee of church elders that she had met the devil in a cornfield and had accepted him as her lover and master. The terrified woman described how she and the devil had led many others, whom she named, in a wild heathenish dance. According to Lilias, a strange blue unearthly light had appeared and had followed the dancers round the cornfield. Her tales grew wilder and wilder, and were eagerly accepted as proof of her dealings with the devil. Lilias was, according to official records, died in prison, and was buried within the Sea Mark at Torryburn. As part of a 2014 program titled The Walking Dead on BBC Radio Scotland, researchers tried to trace the original burial site of Lilias, based on 19th century descriptions of the area. During the investigation, a large seaweed-covered stone slab was found, matching the description of both the area and the features of the burial. Fife archaeologist Douglas Spears, who examined and cleaned it, confirmed the slab was not natural to the beach, but quarried and deliberately placed there. While a full archaeological excavation has not been undertaken, it is possible that there are still remains of Lilias left beneath the slab, in what is believed to be the only known witch's grave of its type in Scotland. In 2001, a team of archaeologists found 4 skeletons at an archaeological site on the island of South Uist in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. At first, it appeared to be a typical Bronze Age discovery, but the researchers soon discovered that the finding was far from normal. The skeletons, one male and one female, were buried in the fetal position. Initial tests revealed that the male had died in around 1600 BC, and the female had died in approximately 1300 BC. That's very strange. That's a 300-year difference. However, some 10 years later, further DNA examination of the remains led to a startling discovery. The 2 skeletons were actually made up of body parts from 6 different individuals, in what archaeologists have branded Frankenstein mummies. In the male skeleton, the torso, skull, and neck, and lower jaw belong to 3 separate men, and the female skeleton is a composite formed from a male skull, a female torso, and the arm of a third person, whose gender had not been determined. Carbon dating revealed that the skull of the female mummy is 50 to 200 years older than the torso. It appears that the mummies were made up of parts from people in the same families, and then put together like a jigsaw to make it look like they were just one person. Archaeologists have no idea why the remains were mummified and then mixed together. However, Parker Pearson believes that the mixing of remains was done to combine different ancestries of families to create a symbolic ancestor that literally embodied traits from multiple lineages. That is so weird. A medieval or Saxon man whose skeleton was found in a Roman villa in Hampshire, England, may have been buried in the countryside because of a jaw deformity that made his community consider him plagued by spirits. It's also possible the community had earlier trepanned his skull to exorcise the evil spirits. The man with the deformed jaw, who died at about age 35 to 45, had a missing right hand and a missing foot bone, possibly a punishment or a result of desecration by grave robbers. His skull had been trepanned or drilled. His remains and the remains of the other man at the rock-worn Roman villa were excavated in the 1960s. Archaeologists say the man, who was about 5 feet 7 inches, was buried in a lonely place and weighed down with stones. His skeleton was found face down in a shallow grave in 1965. The left side of the skull has a hole on the frontal bone, just below the temporal ridge, says a blog called Hampshire Archaeology by Dave Allen. This trepanning near the muscle attachment for the lower jaw was presumably done in an attempt to relieve chronic pain, or to exorcise the bad spirits associated with his deformity. He survived the operation and the bone had healed, but his ultimate burial in such a lonely place, face down and weighed down with stones, suggests that the community were worried that the evil influence that caused his troubles might still be around. In 2014, researchers examined the skeletal remains of 17th century graves in northwestern Poland, and speculated that the ones given vampire burials may have actually been cholera victims, explaining the extra precautions the villagers took in dealing with their bodies. Such popularly named vampire graves occurred predominantly in the post-medieval period and across the continent, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Italy, Ireland, and Greece, to name only a few locations. Bodies are often found to have strange items buried with them or on them. Some have iron stakes driven through their torsos, yet others have bricks or stones found in their mouths. Some have stones placed on their necks. These symbols and artifacts were used to ward off evil influences, a magical practice that has existed around the globe throughout history. A thread connects most of these burials, including the graves found at Drosko in northwestern Poland, in what they seem to have suffered through epidemics or illnesses. Leslie Gregorica, from the University of South Alabama, who published a study in the journal PLOS I, writes of the burials. Of these 6 individuals, 5 were interred with a sickle placed across their throat or abdomen, intended to remove the head or open the gut should they attempt to rise from their grave. These practices were purposeful treatment of the dead, who were considered at risk of becoming vampires and returning to the village to feast on the living, or infect the healthy with their curse. Legend has it that centuries ago, a witch turned a would-be king of England and his men and knights to stone. which still stand and are among the Rollright Stone Circle at Warwickshire. Now a new legend has cropped up. A 7th century skeleton recently unearthed at the site is being called the witch who turned the ambitious men to stone. The woman stood between 4 feet 11 inches and 5 feet tall, and was buried with a Roman patera, or bronze vessel, possibly used to cook offerings to the gods, a large amber bead, and an amethyst set in silver. The patera is only the 5th found in England. She also had with her a large spindle whorl, which, with the patera, ITV.com says, indicates that Rita, the Saxon pagan Rollright witch, as she is being called, was a spiritual woman of high status. The Bronze Age Rollright stones have much lore and myths surrounding them to this day. Many stone circles in the British Isles were supposedly revelers petrified by God or the devil for dancing and fiddling or picking turnips on the Sabbath. The Celtic inhabitants of a small industrious Iron Age settlement in Dorset, England, are believed to have sacrificed a young woman by slitting her throat, before burying her body in a curious arrangement of bones. Archaeologists also unearthed a series of bizarre hybrid animals, in which the bones of different animals were intentionally combined together in what is reminiscent of the mythological beast of ancient cultures. The burials of hybrid animal bones at the site recall myths from the Mediterranean and Near East about bird-woman harpies, goat-lion chimeras, eagle-lion griffins, man-goat satyrs, man-bull minotaurs, and man-horse centaurs. Ancient people imagined combining various animal and or human parts into one fantastic and sometimes grotesque beast. Some were understood as monsters, others as wise counselors or guardians of shepherds and the countryside. One particularly bizarre arrangement of animal bones also involved a human skeleton, reports The Independent. A young woman appears to have been sacrificed. There was an indication that her throat had probably been slit, and was then buried on a bed of specially arranged cattle, sheep, dog, and horse bones. Significantly, these animal bones had been deliberately sorted to mirror the bones of the dead woman. The animal's skull fragments formed the surface her head rested on, while the animal's leg bones formed the surface her legs rested on. And that is the end of this article. Now, this was a wild one. There was a whole bunch of really, really cool stuff in here. One common thread through all of these different stories of different archaeological discoveries that were kind of weird and kooky was the idea that they were trying to keep the person in the grave because they believed that the person was going to come back to life and come out and attack the living. Now, this was a common thread whether you were talking about vampires or you were talking about zombies or you were talking about witches in this article. In all three of those cases, they wanted to make sure that that person did not get back out of the grave. Sometimes they put heavy stones on it. Sometimes they drive a stake down through it to pin them to the grave. And sometimes they would put the scythe over top of them so it would cut into them if they tried to get up. There's also other ones that weren't mentioned in this article. There's also some that were used predominantly in England, but also in other parts of Europe, where they would put a metal cage over top the grave. So they would dig the grave, they'd bury the person, they'd cover it back up with dirt, and then they would put an iron cage over top of the gravesite. So that if the person did manage to get out of the casket, get up through the ground, they would be stopped by the iron cage. Now, this had the advantage of being strong because it's iron, but also iron is one of those metals that is supposed to ward off ghosts and evil spirits, much like silver does, and salt also. There are more pure elements, and they're thought to have the ability to either banish or at least hurt and slow down evil spirits. So that's probably one of the reasons they used iron for that purpose. But what's fascinating to me is the belief that these people had in all of these things existing. Now, you could say, well, we can say that this person had cholera and this was this and this was that, and that's all well and good, but understand that these people believed that witches existed. These people believed that vampires existed. They believed that werewolves existed. We talked about on other shows we've had shows about the werewolf witch trials and about the regular witch trials. A lot of people know about the witch trials, but until we did the show on the werewolf witch trials, like almost nobody talked about that. And essentially what that was pretty much the same as the witch trials, and in a lot of places you had both going on simultaneously, to where you would have people being accused of being werewolves. And evidence was presented, it was documented, they were found guilty, and they were put to death, much like in the witchcraft trials. In the witch trials and in the werewolf trials, I'm sure that there were innocent people that were found guilty, they were tortured until they confessed, and they were put to death, that weren't actually witches, they weren't actually werewolves. But I think that there were some that actually were witches. There had to be a percentage that were the real thing, because we know witches exist today. So there had to be a certain percentage of those people that were actually guilty, that were put to death. I tend to think that you're probably looking at the exact same thing with the werewolf trials. Now, you can say that that's silly. You can say that you don't believe werewolves exist, all that kind of stuff. And that's fine. But there is a long and a rich history of documentation of werewolves and of shapeshifters and all these things throughout pretty much every culture on the planet's history. Now, you can also say, well, that's all folklore and that's all mythology and none of that's real. Okay. If none of it's real, why do so many different places have so many different legends about werewolves? Places that had no contact with each other, in a time when they weren't traveling back and forth trading with each other. Why do they have those same legends with a lot of the same things? Not only is it that a person can turn into a wolf or a werewolf, but also a lot of the details are the same in the different legends. You have that with the vampire legends. You have that with legends of zombies and the undead. You have that with so many of these different legends. So there has to be something to it. Now, exactly what that is, that's definitely up for debate and speculation, but there has to be that nugget of truth that all of that is based on. And that's what you find when you research these things. You find a lot of stuff that's kind of out there. You find a lot of cases where people were put to death or something for no good real reason. They weren't guilty of anything. They just believed them to be something, so they tortured them until they said they were that thing. But you also find things that you can't really discount, that there's just too many different accounts of, from too many different areas. So there has to be something to it, is what I'm saying. To me, it's interesting because if these people believed this so much that they had all of these different things that they would do after death to ensure that that person didn't come back out of the grave, that level of belief is not just based on a story. Okay? We have urban legends today. We have horror stories today that people claim are true, but that we all know aren't true. We aren't that different from these people of that time period. I guarantee you they had legends and stories during that time that they knew weren't true. The reason I say that is, think about an urban legend that is out there today that you know isn't true. Would you go through all of the different preparations and the steps to ensure that whatever that thing is didn't get you? So in other words, if the urban legend is that people will rise from their graves, and you know that's not true, would you go through all of the extra work and effort to stake that person down into the grave so they couldn't leave, to put a scythe over top of them so that they would cut themselves if they tried to leave, to place a large heavy stone that you had to go quarry from somewhere else and haul over there to the grave and place there, and then put an iron cage over top of the grave? Would you go through all that trouble if you knew that the story was BS? No, you would only do that if you believed that it was real, if it was based on something real. Think back to when we were growing up. Every single one of us, well, most of us at least, were told the story of Santa Claus and all that kind of stuff. It did not take very long before the old BS detector started going off in your head. I remember for me, I was a very, very young child, and it just didn't add up. I was being told that there was this dude named Santa Claus who could magically fly around the world and deliver presents to all the boys and girls in one night. And that he would come down the chimney and leave presents and then disappear, go back up the chimney. My first thought was, well, how does a fat guy get down a chimney? One, he can't be in very good shape. His cardio and his stamina have to suck. So I doubt very seriously he's climbing back up that chimney. But then you're told it's magic. Okay. What about houses that don't have chimneys? Does he go through the heating vent? Does he slip through the keyhole? It just didn't make any sense to me. Even if you take into account time zones, there's no way in hell he could get around the world and stop at every house in one night. It's impossible. So from the time I was a very, very little kid, I knew Santa was BS. And I remember telling my parents, they would say, oh, you better go to bed tonight or Santa won't come. I'm like, dude, there's no Santa. You're crazy. You're lying to me. That cannot be a true thing because there's no possible way. And it got to the point where my mom said, look, just shut up. Because you got a little brother and he believes, so just shut up. So I would have to pretend like I believed in Santa so that my little brother could be excited on Christmas morning. So what I'm saying is something that is an obvious fairy tale like that, it doesn't take very long for you to go, wait a minute, this is BS. So their belief, and such a strong belief that they would go through all these steps to ensure that these things did not leave the grave, had to have been based on something tangible, something real. It couldn't have been just some story they heard, because it wouldn't take very long at all for them to say, wait a minute, you're telling me that this thing is going to come back to life, somehow bust its way out of its coffin, right? Its little wooden box that we buried it in. And then after that, it's going to dig its way out from at least 4, maybe 6 feet of dirt that's compressed down on top of the casket. It's going to be able to dig its way out of that and get out and then come after us. That's crazy. There's no way that's true. It had to have happened. It had to have had some sort of basis in reality for these people to go through all of this trouble to make sure that it didn't happen. Another interesting thing before I turn over to Old Boy that has to do with burial is back in the olden days, before embalming and all that kind of stuff became a thing, they used to bury people and they would put a bell on top of the grave. And the bell was actually hooked to a string, and the string was fed down into the casket before they buried it. So they would lower the casket in, they would put the string from the bell in the casket and shut it, and then cover it over with dirt. The reason they did that was in case you accidentally got buried alive. Because they didn't embalm bodies and do all that stuff back in the old days. So sometimes people would get buried alive. They would fall into a coma or a deep sleep like that, and it would appear that they were dead, and people would think they were dead. They'd bury them, and then they'd wake up inside the coffin, dead. To everybody up on top, but not dead inside the coffin. You see what I'm saying? They're still alive in there. And we know that because some of these people got exhumed. And when they exhumed them and they opened up the coffin, they found scratch marks on the inside of the coffin lid, to where these people were clawing at it, trying to get out as they were suffocating to death inside of those coffins. Imagine that. That is a horrible way to go. So what they did to stop that is they started burying people with a bell up on top that was hooked to a string, so that if you woke up inside the coffin, you're like, oh crap, I'm buried. I'm alive and I'm buried. This sucks. You could grab the string and tug on it, and it would ring the bell up top so that people would know that you were alive and they'd dig your ass up. That's always been fascinating to me, the idea that at one point in our history, people were being buried alive and they didn't even know it. And then these poor people wake up in the coffin, buried, and that's got to be the worst thing ever, because you know you're screwed. You can't get out. There's no way in hell you're getting out of there. Even if you can somehow break through the wood, you've got 6 feet of dirt above you. That weighs so much. There's no way in hell you can open that coffin lid. There's no way you can climb your way out of that. You're done. And that knowledge that you're going to die like that, and there's nothing you can do, has got to be one of the most terrifying things in the history of everything, in my opinion. So with all that being said, I'm going to throw over to Old Boy and see what he thought about the article and what he thinks about all the different crazy stuff they used to do when they buried people. So Old Boy, go ahead, brother.
Thank you, brother, and thank you for listening to us tonight. So, all I'm going to say about all this is this has been going on for a very long time. They thought you were a vampire. They would, after they bury you, because they thought the dead, you remember, when you die, your body explodes because it's either the air or heat or the water or the weather changes. So your body explodes from inside. So basically, you rot away. Stuff comes out of your mouth because back then they didn't have what we have right now. They embalm you, or you get burnt, or they do all kinds of other stuff. You could plenty of different things you do now. They didn't have that technology back then. So what would happen is blood and fluid would come out, so they think you're a vampire. So they would stake your heart. So they would cut off the head. I've seen it. This happened a lot in Romania and Europe, Eastern Europe a lot, even parts of Russia. So I'm not surprised about that. They used to think if you're a witch, they would, like he was talking about you, they would torture you in so many different ways. He would eventually admit it because, one, they had one where they would burn your tongue with like a branding iron kind of thing, or like hot pliers to get them hot. Well, of course, anybody's going to admit to stop the pain because it's definitely painful. They had all kinds of different all kinds of torture methods to get you to admit you're a witch, and they would bury you alive or burn you to the stake. I believe this on that part because back then there was a lot of superstition, especially with Satanism. People thought if you're a witch, you were into Satan anyway, and you were worshiping him. And half the time, majority of the time, they weren't. But then it was a whole different world. You thought something, you just had to have somebody admit to it, so they would torture you. And 99% of the time, you're going to admit you're that thing. And they kill you pretty much anyway, or do something horrible to you. Now, with him talking about all these different creatures, we'll get into that in a minute, because that's something that's interesting me. Here's something. If you guys ever seen Greek mythology, is one of my favorites. Especially if you guys seen Jason and the Argonauts, one of my favorite movies. They had the Hydra, the harpies he was talking about. They had those in it, and those are pretty cool. But back then in the 60s, it was really cool stuff, technology at that time, because they don't have CGI then. So some of those creatures are in that, like he was talking. And then the Minotaur in that, half man, half bull. There was other creatures too, and especially in ancient Egypt, they said there was different creatures like the griffin and just other creatures that got mixed together. And he even says aliens were doing some of this stuff. If you read some of the Bible, it says Nephilim had children that mated with certain animals, and they made abominations, like human bodies with like chicken legs. I'm just throwing it out. It wasn't like that, but bull legs, and looked like tigers, but they were half human, half man. All kinds of giant, whatever you want to call it. All kinds of different abominations. There's been so many lores about that. With the Minotaur, I think that was true. I think there's some truth to that, because there's truth to almost anything, but it's probably been stretched out over the thousands of years, because that's a long time ago. So I believe a lot of these stories were exaggerated, and I think it was more of fear and superstition with the burying things and the vampires and the werewolves and witches. I do believe werewolves exist, but not way you think. I'll get in that in a minute. But with the mutations and stuff, I believe that. I believe there's still stuff going on that they've done in laboratories. They've been doing it for a long time. I believe they existed at one time. I don't believe like you see in the movies, But there's just so many stories of this. They have carvings in urban in Egyptian. They have pictures of this. Why would they carve this in their walls? It just, and they found stuff. They just hide it from us because they don't want us to know the truth. Werewolves are a whole different story. I think there's more to that. I think that has to do with the supernatural. I believe it's a curse. I believe there's something going on there that we don't understand. It also could be a shapeshifter. Somebody could change to different things, and that's just something they choose to do. That's just another theory. Vampires, I don't believe how Hollywood portrayed them, but what I've heard before, and there's people who believe this, that vampires existed, but they're not what you think. They're very nasty creatures. They do feed on blood and dead bodies, what I've read. Not eating them, but they drink them. And then in the movies, they can't drink the dead, and that's not what I've heard. I think there's something similar to them. I don't know what you would call them vampires. I mean, there's real people who consider themselves vampires, and they really drink human blood, and they say they need it. And then there's psychic vampires, the people who feed off your energy, and that's been proven. And there's people who are real vampires, but they don't disappear, but they just drink people's blood and they dress up, and that's more of an Americanized now vampire, like but they even have fake teeth. They get everything made. You know, you've probably seen it on TV. They have a whole bunch of documentaries, but there's been people who've actually killed people and drank people's blood. I've heard it. In the 1800s, there was a movie called Martin, where it was George Romero's one of his first movies, and he made it about a guy who was going around, thought he was a vampire, and he was going around cutting people with a razor and drinking their blood and killing them. There was a killer that did that, and he thought he was a vampire. There's a couple people who thought they're vampires and killed people, just like Wolf syndrome. They think they're wolves and they turn into, but it's actually a disease that people actually think they're wolves. And then there was that thing where the guys grow hair too much and they look like a werewolf, and people mistake them as being werewolves. Werewolves have been a part of culture for a long time. I have my opinions. I believe there may be a possibility, not what you think of Hollywood has exaggerated. Urban legends, like I'm trying to do so many things at once right now because we don't have a lot of time. Now, urban legends that are not true, like Slender Man. There's a truth to it, but Slender Man itself is not real. It was from a story about a fairy in the 1800s, 1600s. I think we've done a story about Slender Man. And they blew it up on Reddit and Creepypasta and made it now this thing. Now people made it real. There's kids who actually tried to kill people over that said Slender Man told them to kill this girl. It was in Wisconsin. These two girls tried to kill this girl, and they stabbed her 20, 30 times. And then there's another guy who tried to kill his friend and stabbed him and said Slender Man did it. So you can turn things into reality. And people are going to say, well, what do you mean? We can turn things real. It's not that they're real, but the legend becomes real. Bigfoot, a lot of people think it's fake, but there's so many sightings that to the point is now we don't know if it's not real anymore. James Hershey has seen it, so I know it. He's not a liar, for one. He's got no reason to lie to people. And people, well, maybe you saw a bear. A bear is not that tall, for one, almost 11 feet standing up on its hind legs, and it doesn't run on its hind legs like that and leap over 6-7 foot fence with one leap. It just doesn't do that. I think most of the sightings are people lying about it, trust me, but it's impossible for all of them to be. I've seen something. I've seen things in the desert where I live that I've seen something jump over a 7-foot fence, and the only thing happened is the tip of its foot caught the fence and knocked it down, and it ran out in the desert, and it was 7 feet tall. I've seen things running through the desert that looked like a lion, but was running on 2 legs with small arms, and it was got like a lion's I don't know, like fur thing around him. and it was weird looking, and it ran off into the desert. 5 or 6 people saw it. My friend's mom, who don't even believe in it, saw it with her own eyes. So I believe some of these things exist. I don't know if they all do. And I think they're messing around with stuff like he was talking about, like goat, half man, half goat, half pig, half goat. They're doing that right now. They're trying to do that in other countries. They were talking about it. So that's going to maybe a reality one day. I don't think it's a good idea. You know, I think some bad are going to come from this, guys. Now, the bearing thing, I believe that we thought things were either dead and they came back to life because of, you know, back then they didn't know any better and they did some of the stuff they were doing, and then they did find like weird looking skeletons and stuff like that. That stuff I can't answer, guys. That's something I don't know, and I've seen myself. There's some stuff that, like, there was a story about this guy who went in the cellar, or I think in the basement. They found all this stuff. It looks like a vampire kit, and they found like things there that looked like they were like fairies. They looked like a werewolf's head, all kinds of stuff. And it looks pretty real, guys. But you can never know with how people do stuff now. You never know if it's fake or not. That's the sad thing, is there's so many people who have faked in Hollywood. If you know how to do stuff right, like I saw a picture of the Wolf Man or something in Mexico. This guy supposedly killed this dog man or whatever, and you could tell it was fake. And they asked him where it went, and it magically disappeared. But he probably knew how to do. You know, there's some people know how to do this. I have a friend that knows how to do makeup and makes them know how to do all that monster stuff, and could have done that. You would never know. We'll never know unless you actually see it. That's the sad thing. And I don't always believe that either. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But I kind of agree with what a lot of James is saying. But some of it, you're always going to have that. We have that now. People say they see things, and we have stories today. The same thing happens. And 90% of it's probably exaggerated. Some of it might be real. They're even saying still some of this stuff is going on. They're still certain villages still believe this. They're still cutting off the dead's head after they die. Remember, in certain parts of Hades, there are people who have come back. They weren't dead. They used some kind of toxic chemical. The voodoo doctors there know how to do this. And it makes you feel like you're dead, but there's people who've come back and they said, "Oh, he was dead," but he said he wasn't the same self. He was pretty much like a slave because they use this kind of drug. It comes from like a blowfish and all kinds of other stuff, but they've done that. So I don't know. I've seen a lot of weird things, man. So that's all I gotta say. There you go, brother.
The stuff about the human-animal chimeras is 100% true. In ancient times and in today's times, there are declassified documents from the CIA that talk about experiments that we were doing, and other countries were doing it as well, but the United States of America were doing experiments where they were combining human and animal DNA through genetics. They were cloning creatures that were made up of a human being mixed with genetic material from several different kinds of animals. They did a pig, they did a bunch of different things. That information is out there to find. That documentation has been declassified. We've talked about it before. So that 100% exists in today. I've done multiple stories on Paranormal News about different things that they're doing with cloning and different things that they're trying to combine and all kinds of stuff like that. That 100% exists. As far as ancient times with like the Minotaur and the Centaur and the Satyr and all those kind of creatures, it's way too much to get into right now because we have limited time. But if you go on the YouTube channel and you find a show called The Origin of Monsters, that is a full hour on that subject. And I go way in depth on all of the biblical stuff, all the historical stuff that proves that that's real. Nutshell is when the angels came down and they mated with women in Genesis 6. That created the giants, the Nephilim. They didn't just mate with women. The Bible also says that they mated with all kinds of different creatures. And as Old Boy said, they created abominations. Those abominations were your mentor, your centaur, your all those kind of creatures that are half man, half this, half man, half that. That is what comes from that mating. And I back that up with the Bible. I back that up with the Book of Enoch. I back that up with historical texts and all that kind of stuff on that episode. So if you want all the proof for it, you want all the references, that's the show to go listen to, because I do a full hour on that. But that is 100% real. Another thing that could have caused that belief in people coming back from the dead and leaving their grave is sometimes when things would go bad, they would dig up these bodies of people that they suspected to be wolves or suspected to be vampires or witches or whatever. And they wanted to try to cut off the head or something like that to try to make sure that that curse stopped. And what they would find when they would exhume these bodies was that it had blood coming out the mouth, like Old Boy was talking about. But they also found that the fingernails continued to grow and the hair continued to grow. So they would have longer hair and longer fingernails than they did when they buried them. So that made people think, oh my God, these people are still alive. You know, that could have been something that led to that belief that this is a real thing that would make them take these precautions. Now we know today that the human body continues to grow hair after you die for a decent amount of time. Your nails continue to grow for a decent amount of time after you die. As the gases build up in your body swells. That swelling forces out liquid from your mouth. It also comes from your eyes, your ears, your anus. All your holes bleed, basically. It's not really blood per se, but it is a mixture of different fluids that are inside your body that get expelled outward because of the swelling of the gas. That causes that phenomenon that Old Boy was talking about. Back then, they didn't know that. They didn't know what the science was behind it that caused that to happen. So for them digging up a body and saying, oh crap, there's blood coming out this dude's mouth, that must mean he was drinking blood, right? He's a damn vampire. That makes complete and total sense to me. Now, I also believe that it had to have had some sort of other reference in real life as well. There had to be cases where these people actually were guilty of the things that they were accused of. I think the majority of people weren't, but I think that there were probably some that were. Because like I said, we know today that these things exist. So if witchcraft exists today, and we know, like with Wicca, for example, we know going back in time that existed for a long period of time. We know that paganism was a definite thing, and we know that they did spellcraft, and we know that they worshiped many different gods and did sacrifices to the gods, and they had different spells and potions and things like that they did in order to heal you, in order to bring forward the harvest, all those kind of things. We know all that is true. So the idea, and I've heard this for many, many people, and when I say this, please understand, I'm saying this with the utmost respect. I'm not trying to be mean. But the idea that every single person that was accused of witchcraft wasn't a witch is nonsense. It's stupid. Because we know that there were witches back then. We know that there are witches today. We know that it's true. Every single one of you listening knows that to be a fact. So if you know that there's witches today, and you know that there's witches back then, logic would suggest that some of them probably got tried for witchcraft. If they were practicing witchcraft, they probably got caught practicing witchcraft, and they were probably killed for it. Now, we can go back and forth on whether that was a good thing or a bad thing or right or wrong or whatever. That's not the point I'm making. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm not saying it was the wrong thing to do. I'm saying that some of those people that were put to death as witches were witches. It wasn't just crazy Christians slaughtering a bunch of people. There was actual witchcraft going on. That is 100% true. Now, should those people be put to death for it? That is up to you to decide on your own. I don't particularly think that it's something you should kill somebody over. I mean, the Bible tells you not to do it, but that's between you and God, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not called to judge you. As a matter of fact, Jesus said that himself. Judge not, lest ye be judged. I'm not supposed to judge you for what you do. So if you want to do witchcraft, if you want to be in league with the devil and worship Satan and do all that kind of crap, that's on you. That's not on me. All I can do is love you, try to tell you the truth, and it's up to you to make up your own mind. And I think that's a good way to go about things. Too many times we have people that judge other people, and they try to force them to live by a set of rules that they live by. Now, I think we all have to live by a certain set of rules in society. That's why we have laws, etc. But as far as what you believe, that's between you and God. And even if you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, that's still between you and God, because God exists. So that's between you and him, and you're going to have to deal with that when you die. And if you're right and there's nothing out there, then you'll just be dead. But if you're wrong, then you're way wrong. You see what I'm saying? But that's up to you. That's not up to me. I love you either way. My co-host, Old Boy, is not a Christian. He is a pagan, a witch, a Satanist, whatever you want to say. That's between him and God. I love Old Boy. He's one of my best friends in the world. I'd take a bullet for that man. Now, you would think that because I am a devout Christian, and he is definitely not, that we're not supposed to get along. We're not supposed to be friends. We're supposed to hate each other. But I'm here to tell you we're not supposed to hate each other. It doesn't matter that he's not right with God. That's between him and God. That's not up to me. That has no effect on me. My relationship with Jesus Christ is my relationship with Jesus Christ, and I am good with it. Do I wish that Old Boy would get saved? Absolutely, because I love Old Boy and I don't want him to burn. But that's not my choice. That's his choice. I can tell you that I love that man and I respect that man, and he is a good man. So my message today, to wrap this whole thing up, and I'm speaking to the Christians out there because I'm one of you, but I'm also speaking to all you pagans and all you Satanists and all you witches and all you atheists and just everybody listening. Cut it out. Stop it. We got to love each other. We're all brothers and sisters. Whether you believe in the Bible that we're all descended from Adam and Eve and we're all family, or whether you believe in science that we evolved from a monkey somehow and that there was a common ancestor that we all share. Somewhere down the line, the first man and the first woman appeared. Whether God made them or whether they evolved from a monkey or they came here from another planet or however the hell it happened, whatever you believe, somewhere down the line, the first man and the first woman was here. And they made the rest of us. So no matter what you believe, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all family. And we damn sight better start acting like it. Because we spend too much time hating and arguing and trying to kill each other. And it's ridiculous. Imagine what we could accomplish and where we could be as a species if we just treated each other like family instead of like enemies all the time. That's my message. That's my soapbox for the day. Let me know down in the comments when this hits YouTube what you guys think. As always, like with everything else, it's up to you to decide. And we're almost out of time, so really quick, old boy, give your shout outs and we'll get out of here.
Thank you, brother. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. Check us out on Parax Radio at 12 Eastern, Monday, technically in the morning, and 9 Pacific time still, Sunday night. And now we're going to be on Tuesdays. I think it's 5 Pacific time PM and 8 Eastern PM on Tuesday nights on Parax Radio. Check that out. If you want to get any merchandise, check out our store. He'll tell you what to get, shirts, where to go. Shirts, all kinds of stuff, COVID masks, but even now COVID's ending, you could just keep it as a, souvenir or something. You guys want to follow us, go to James Hershey's YouTube page and subscribe. You know what it is. All the old shows are on there, and the new show is too. Our books are all out everywhere. He'll tell you where to get those. We have a surprise for you down the line. We'll keep talking about it later down the line. It's almost summertime. In a couple of days, it's going to be summer. I hope you guys are all safe. It's getting really, really hot out there. And just like James said, let's try to all get along. Me and him don't believe in the same thing. And I have my opinions on everything that we talk about and some of the stuff he said earlier. But I don't hate anybody. I try not to. And I think that's probably the best message we could do is try to get along with each other, because there's just a lot of stuff going on, and it's all religions, all races, everybody. We need to stop this, because we're just destroying each other for nothing. And most of it's for incomplete information, false stuff being told, instigating. It's all kinds of stuff, just like he said. So I hope everybody has a great week. Try to get along with each other, and I love you guys. Misfits, Sugar Ladies, Monster Hunters, and Demon Lovers. I love you, and blessed be, and have a great night.
Thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate you. We love you. The shameless plugs, youtube.com/James Hershey Jr., teespring.com/store/staring into the abyss. That's it. That's done. No more. Have a good night until we speak to you again. Love each other, please. Love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do we. Bye-bye.